Our second panel for the day will be led by Amos Harel, military affairs analyst at Haaretz. Due to his years of covering terror attacks, military operations, and regional changes, he's always an excellent read. But when there's an upswing in violence in and around Israel, as unfortunately is the case right now, his take on events are really invaluable. So, Amos?
Good evening. Wow, it's a great crowd. The last 2 months were quite difficult for Israel, even by our usual standards and our relatively low expectations. We've had more than 7 weeks of violence where 19 Israelis and more than 80 Palestinians died in Israel, in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. And I think for the first time in years, fear has returned to the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. There's a word that nobody wants to use, intifada. At the moment, we're calling it anything but. But I think in truth, we are experiencing something close to an intifada, although perhaps not as strong as we've witnessed before. We haven't seen yet, and hopefully will not see, suicide bombings in buses and restaurants like the second intifada 10 years ago. And there are no thousands of Palestinians marching and demonstrating in Palestinian towns in the West Bank the way they did almost 30 years ago at the height of the first intifada. But violence, as I said, is back in our lives. And it also provided us with a reminder that things do not remain as they are, that there's a price to managing the conflict, which has been the favorite attitude of the Netanyahu government. This has a cost as well, not only attempting to solve the conflict. What all this means regarding the two-state solution, which not only decades of Haaretz editorials, but all the last 3 right-wing governments in Israel have supported. Is the solution still relevant? And will the regional situation where Arab states are entangled in very vicious civil wars, where hundreds of thousands of civilians being killed and millions losing their homes, does this change the international agenda in the Middle East? And where does this put the Palestinian and Israeli conflict when we talk about priorities? What does occupation mean for the ability of Israel to remain a democratic state? With us to deal with all these very difficult and urgent questions are some of the best experts in their fields. Jeffrey Goldberg is a well-known author, a national correspondent for The Atlantic magazine, and also probably the journalist with the most access to President Obama. Member of Knesset Zuhair Ba'alul, a member of the Labour Party in the last few years, also a very well-known journalist in Israel, probably the most popular sports journalist in the eyes of my generation in Israel. Aluf Benn is the editor-in-chief of Haaretz, also my boss. But for many years, he has followed the Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations very, very closely. And last but not least, Koby Huberman is the co-founder of the Israeli Peace Initiative. I'd like to invite them all. Yeah, the mic is on. Great. Jeffrey, the first question goes to you. You've talked about this in your own speech earlier today, but in your view, did America give up on the peace process? And considering the fact that the Kerry initiative failed so miserably, as did the previous efforts by the Obama administration, will the president prefer to wait it out and to leave the problem to the next president in a year and 2 months, or maybe to the next president or the one after that?
Yes, yes, no, yes. No, wait, no, no, yeah, yes, yes. The answer is yes.
Now you've gotten me
Yes,
confused.
yeah. I mean, the White House has signaled as much that it's given up, which is, it's not an unusual conclusion to draw. It's the sort of the obvious conclusion. What's unusual is that the White House bothered to even signal this when Netanyahu was coming to Washington last week or 2 weeks ago. Usually we maintain the fiction that there's a peace process. But now they decided no longer to bother even maintaining that there's a peace process. I mean, remember that the president was always doubtful. I mean, since his first encounters with Netanyahu in 2009, he was always doubtful about the possibilities.
It wasn't exactly love at first sight.
No, I mean, it was, yeah, I mean, it was you know, the funniest thing was this. I asked Obama in an interview once, I said, right before Netanyahu was coming on one of those periodic unpleasant visits, and I asked him, I said, I thought this was like I was trapping him in a question. I said, do you consider him a friend? Do you consider Bibi a friend? And the president gave a really elegant answer, and he looked at me and he said, you know, we're both so busy with our jobs that it's, you know, I thought it was very good. I thought it was a very clever answer. But no, I mean, he didn't. What happened a couple of years ago was that he gave John Kerry this job. John Kerry is eager to make a peace between Israelis and Palestinians. John Kerry is a senior figure in his party. John Kerry started Obama really in national politics. And so Obama was like, fine, go and enjoy. And if you need any help, let me know. And it didn't work, and Obama is, there's a disappointment, because remember, they wanted to do two things, the Obama administration coming in. They wanted to do only two things in the Middle East. They wanted an Iran nuclear deal. They wanted to sort of bring Iran into the fold, and they wanted an Israeli-Palestinian peace. So they got one out of two. They got one out of two. But no, it's not going to start again unless something dramatic happens. And the real question to me is the next, going to this next president question. I don't know what sane president would make this an early initiative. I mean, given conditions the way they are, I don't know why they would waste their time.
Zohair, in the long run, in your view, can Israel remain a democratic state without reaching a peace agreement with the Palestinians? Some of the demographic experts are talking of a Palestinian majority between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea within 10 years, perhaps a bit more than that.
The classical dream of the Zionist wants to establish the country from the river to Iraq, to Furat and Hedekel. I don't know what's the names in English. So it was the classical and historical dream. I think when you are asking me, and when I listen to Tzipi Chotoveli, and I saw impressive, I have a big impression from his speech, her speech. She and Benjamin Netanyahu has the most important and excellent English language, but she has a lot of mistakes. Because when we are speaking about the shalom, the absence shalom between the Palestinian and the Israeli side, the strong side is Israel. The weak side is the Palestinian. The occupation is from the behavior of Israel occupation, not the Palestinian side. The victim is the Palestinian side, not the Israeli side. I visited recently Abu Mazen, and he told me, I want to extend my hand to Benjamin Netanyahu, but he don't want. I want to shake hand, but he ignored. I want to make a peace, but he don't want. You know, the reason that we have a freeze situation, this is the bad policy of the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. He didn't care for the new generation. I want to be the man, want to see our future, our tunnel with a light, not with a darkness. I want to to create a new reality for your son and my daughter, not for the bloodshed and not more war in our region. This is the reason that now we are talking about a one country solution, one state solution, despite the fact that yesterday and let me say 2 or 3 years ago, we spoke about a two-state solution. So I am living in the Middle East, and in the Middle East we have a lot of imagination, but I cannot imagine the tomorrow day because of the chaos situation in our Middle East.
Thank you. Aluf, isn't it time to admit that the experiment has failed? You covered Oslo very, very closely, also with Remy, who was here before in 1993. So 22 years have passed. It did not bring peace, and more than that, I think in the eyes of most Israelis, every time that Israel has evacuated a territory, most times it was unilaterally. If you look at the West Bank towns in 95, Lebanon
This
2000.
was an agreement.
Yeah, but Lebanon 2000 wasn't. It was unilateral. And Gaza in 2005 was unilateral. And in all those cases, the same area that Israel evacuated almost immediately became a launching pad for attacks against Israel. And my sense is that in the eyes of most Israeli voters, this is the defining experience of the last 20 years. And this is probably why most of them tend to vote right-wing every time there are elections, fearing that more concessions would mean more terrorism. Isn't that the case? And isn't it time to admit that the Oslo road has failed?
But what is the alternative? I mean, you can argue that Oslo failed because it didn't go far enough. You can argue that Oslo failed because Arafat cheated. Rabin and Peres were fooled to believe that it could change the situation. And you can argue that Arafat was fooled by Rabin and Peres, who actually wanted, as Rabin called it, a new force to deal with terror without the Supreme Court and without human rights, without B'Tselem, without human rights NGOs, to subcontract the fight against Hamas to someone else. The truth of the matter is that even the most right-wing governments that served after Oslo did not dismantle the Palestinian Authority, did not send Abu Mazen back into exile and took over Nablus, and none of them comes up with any solution to the basic problem, and that is that you have two populations in the same area, one with full civil rights and freedom of movement, and one without. Now, as far as most of the Israeli public is concerned, Palestinians in the West Bank can stand 10 hours in checkpoints, could all be unemployed and live in poverty as long as Israelis are safe. And each time, Israelis are surprised by the fact that there are some angry young men in the Palestinian Authority who don't like this arrangement. And especially since Camp David, the mainstream public opinion in Israel, and it's been polled time and again, has shown that the majority of Jewish public opinion supports the idea of a two-state solution. And then when the same group of people is asked, will it happen? They say no, which coincides exactly with what Netanyahu has been saying. He says he supports the two-state idea, but it's not practical. Or as he said, Israel will have to control the territory to eternity. There is no way to withdraw, there is no way to give it up, but I support the two-state solution. And he wins the election time and again. And if you read interestingly, if you read the platform of Israeli parties, still the idea of Palestinian state is the dividing line between right and left. All the parties from Kahlon all the way to the right don't say these words. And Netanyahu supports the two-state solution, but he never once brought it to party vote or to government vote. It is not the Israeli government position.
So you see that more or less as a lip service to the international community?
I think that when he was under enormous pressure by Obama when they both took power in 2009 to freeze the settlements and enter meaningful negotiations. And this was his way to relieve some of the steam and some of the pressure by saying that, believing, I guess rightly so, that to to most of the Western international community, which Netanyahu cares about, paying lip service to the idea is enough to keep Israel in the club and without serious international pressure to change anything.
Koby, I'd like to present the next question, which has a relationship to what Aluf has said. What are the chances, considering that this is more or less the situation, what are the chances that sort of grassroots initiatives would lead to any kind of a new process? And are Israelis and Palestinians actually willing to discuss that, or is it just a small minority on either side which is actually willing to participate?
Okay. First of all, I think I'll tell you what we are hearing in our conversations with counterparts in Palestine, in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, when we, the Gulf, Jordanians and like, when we meet in forums, track 2 meetings, etc. We all believe that the two-state solution, as it is phrased now, is a dead proposition. It is a dead proposition because it is based on the idea that the Israelis and the Palestinians will agree to it. And the only way the two-state solution is going to materialize is only and only if it is within a regional context in which Israel negotiates it with the Palestinians and with some of the Arab states on a very different package deal than we are used to see compared to what we have seen in the past. And there is a fundamental reason to look for a very different model. And looking for a different model is showing us that civil society, people, think tanks, academia, can come with new ideas when the political systems are stuck. And therefore, if you ask me, will the grassroots movement change the situation? I'm not sure. It is a matter for the leaders to decide. But could civil society and free thinkers in Israel, Palestine, and the region bring new ideas? Absolutely yes. And that is exactly what we are doing. We are trying to create a new model, a new paradigm, where because of the analysis of the failures of the past, the two-state solution will be only within a regional context. Israel will have to receive much more guarantees and much more benefits for whatever concessions it is going to give to the Palestinians, and those will come from the Arab states. And secondly, it will have to be negotiated in a very different way by leveraging the huge opportunity that we have at the moment. And I must say that we have seen in the past, I would say 3 years, that this model, this paradigm, is beginning to get more and more recognition and more understanding in Jerusalem, in Palestine, in Cairo, and in Jeddah, and just see what is happening in the way people like Netanyahu and Huberman and Lapid talk about the regional approach. This is something that was not in the making just up until, I think, 18 months ago. Now everybody who is keen to see a solution understands it's got to be within a regional context.
But you've mentioned Jordanians, Egyptians, and so on. Is it a top priority now for Sisi or for King Abdullah? They're more bothered by the ISIS threat, by the immediate danger for their regime. And again, I'm going back to that term, to lip service. Isn't it just mentioning that you're in favor of finally solving the Palestinian issue, but actually worrying about other stuff?
Let me give you 2 answers. First of all, if you ask me if this is going to happen in the short run, in some sort of a sense of urgency because of the Arab states, the answer is no. It is still in our hands. If we are going to decide to unlock the regional potential, then we could really decide on the timeline for that, and it is not going to be immediate. The other answer is when we ask the same question, we asked our Egyptian and Saudis and Jordanian friends, will you have the bandwidth to deal with that? They say the following: It is not the top of our priority, but it will never go away. And if you want a solution, try and put an Israeli initiative on the table, and we will find the bandwidth to respond to it. So I think it goes back to our set of priorities and our decision.
I should add something. Israel still has the opportunity to make an alliance, very important alliance with the classical and traditional regime over the Israeli side, Jordan and Saudi, and maybe some of the countries of the Gulf area. There is no vacuum in the political field. If Benjamin Netanyahu haven't the courage in order to engage Abu Mazen and those countries, he will find, as Tzipi Chotoveli said, the ISIS in the corner. This is the reason that this is the time to engage those countries and those historical leadership in the Arab side in order to make this very, very important step in our area.
Yes, but we must remember that the Saudi and now Arab League Peace Initiative that's been on the table since 2002, almost 14 years, stipulates that Israel must withdraw to the 1967 lines, to divide Jerusalem, and in some vague way to recognize the right of return. And so the idea that you can somehow negotiate with the Saudis and Jordanians who are nicer, who have no territorial demands from Israel, who don't care about settlements on their territory, and just ignore the Palestinians and dictate it to them. It's nice when you see Israeli politicians, and I was odd when you asked about the death of Oslo. Why would Yair Lapid, the leader of Yesh Atid, and one of the best experts on ratings and popularity and defining what it means to be mainstream Israeli, I think the best expert on that, adopted the Saudi Peace Initiative and the Palestinian state as a solution for Israel. But then he said, yes, but we won't withdraw to 67. Jerusalem is an idea that we can't obviously give away, and so on. So the idea that you can just go to the nicer partners and ignore the Palestinians is not going to work. It's easier to sell the concessions to the Israeli public. That was the idea during Gaza. That was the Shimon Peres idea of the new Middle East. Okay, we're going to give away Nablus, but we are going to be invited to Casablanca, to the Gulf, to Jordan, and so on. So that would make it nicer and easier for Israelis to absorb the concessions. But at that time, there were, 100,000 settlers? Now there are 2-3 times that number. Everything is more difficult. There's far more bad blood between Israelis and Palestinians than 20 years ago. And the Arab states are far weaker. You know, at that time, Syria was part of the equation as well. Now let's find the Syrian to make peace with. So the idea that the regional approach could somehow rescue you from the nitty-gritty and very difficult and all but impossible negotiation with the Palestinians, I think it's too much to ask.
Koby, just...
Okay, there was a time when Israeli leaders thought about the regional approach as a bypass to the Palestinian issues. Nobody thinks like this anymore. They have learned that this is a combination of solving the core issue with the Palestinians as well as addressing some other regional issues. And let me phrase the opportunity here, not just the alliance. We are seeing tremendous changes with respect to the Arab Peace Initiative. It was modified in order to allow land swaps. It is no longer presented as a diktat, as a take it or leave it. It is, just look at what Chemi Shalev heard from our friend Prince Turki al-Faisal just 2 weeks ago. It is for negotiation. Now let me just share with you that work that we are doing with Palestinians, Saudis, Jordanians, and Egyptians has created a formula that we are now going to promote, which talks about parallel negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, as well as Israel and the regional players, not all of them, along the lines of a nuanced acceptance of the Arab Peace Initiative, not as a dictation. This is the promising new platform, and it may take another year or year and a half until the international community accepts that this is the way forward. We, people in the region, are already convinced, and we have already received the blessings that this is the right direction from various leaders in the region, including ours.
Okay. The American participant in this discussion has been either very polite or very bored, so we'll have to...
No, I'm trying to tweet about the panel, but the panel is getting in the way of my ability to tweet about the panel. It's hard to tweet when you're actually supposed to talk. No.
New invention, guys.
Yeah. Somehow I've got to put the smartphone right in my brain so I could dictate it. I was just before I was in Asia, I went through Abu Dhabi and I was at a big security conference, and I have to tell you that no one this was a lot of people from 10 or 12 of what you would call the classical Sunni regimes. No one cares about the Palestinians anymore. I mean, they just don't. Lip service. I mean, it used to be that there was lip service, right? When you would remind the king of Jordan, he would say, yes. Well, of course, the most important issue is the Palestinians. After doing 25 minutes on the Shia crescent or the threat of Sunni extremism, I mean, it's the same across the board. Now, people aren't even paying lip service. They're too busy. They're too busy, A, fighting for the survival of their own regimes. Saudi Arabia is 5 or 10 years away from an existential crisis. They're so busy they're so busy in Yemen that they can't even fight in Syria. They're so busy getting bogged down in the quagmire of Yemen right now that arguably the more important war they can't even pay sufficient attention to, which is the Americans are getting upset with them about, right? And so there's no energy for it. And the other thing is, it's how one of the dangers that we have in America is that people are just sick of the Israeli-Palestinian dispute and sick of the Middle East generally. The Palestinians face a real danger in the Middle East, that people are just sick of them and the problems. And you hear this in Arab state after Arab state after Arab state. The danger, and this is seemingly paradoxical, although I'm not sure it actually is. The danger is now that no Arabs care, that's not a good thing for Israel, because maybe some of the worst temptations or worst instincts on the Israeli right may take hold. Now that people understand across the world that there is no such thing as linkage, that the key to solving the Middle East's general crisis is to create a Palestinian state. No one really believes anymore.
And you're convinced as well that there's no connection whatsoever anymore?
I sort of, I work it backwards. Does the creation of a Palestinian state get rid of ISIS? No, ISIS isn't for a Palestinian state. They're for the eradication of 6 million Jews. We know what they're for. Does it solve Yemen's civil war? Does it solve Yemen's water crisis? Does it solve the challenges to democracy in Morocco and Algeria? Does it solve Syria? Does it solve Lebanon's sectarian dispute? Does it solve the problem of governance in Egypt? Does it solve jobs, which is one of the main issues across the Arab world? Is a Palestinian state going to bring back a unity in Iraq? I mean, it's nonsense now, and so people don't, and I think, the irony here is that this issue has never been less important. I mean, no offense to exactly Israelis right. Who think that everything's about them, but not that no, but I mean, and Israelis and Palestinians. This is the big enchilada of world crises, right? It used to be, but it's really been knocked down the line, but because there are bigger things going on in the Middle East that don't actually have anything to do with this.
So why still bother?
Why still? In this specific context, I know exactly why I still bother, because the status quo for Israel is not sustainable. So
why? It's been sustainable for 50 years. What's different?
Did you hear what he just said?
I asked.
He said I was very
What
handsome.
has changed? Because it's been sustainable for almost 50 years.
Because
what's different now?
What's different is does Israel have the same world legitimacy that it had 15 years ago today? Are there so many settlers in the West Bank now that you have functionally a binational state, except one party doesn't have a vote? I mean, at a certain point, we don't know when it is. This is the really interesting topic, is we don't know when the tipping point is. We might have hit the tipping point a long time ago, And we don't know, but we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the occupation. At a certain point, the Palestinians are going to wake up as a national polity and say, you know what, we don't want Palestine anymore. We just want to vote. We just want to vote in Israel. Israel's been controlling us for 2 generations. It's a democracy. We want to vote. Israel doesn't have an answer for that right now. It'll be the end of Israel as the idea of a Jewish state, a Jewish haven, right? So we're at a point where maybe we've already reached that tipping point. If we haven't reached it because the world is paying attention elsewhere, we're going to eventually reach it. And it's a slow degrading. It's a slow disintegration. Put aside what it does to Iran. I say this as someone who served in the Israeli army 25 years ago, suppressing the first uprising, and couldn't imagine. If you told me 25 years ago that there'd be soldiers who are half my age still doing the same thing, I would have laughed at you. I mean, it couldn't be. How could Israel, through most of its existence, be doing this same thing over and over again? So I don't think time is on Israel's side. So for Israel's sake, there has to be a reordering of the situation. And the problem, this is why I come back to that original point, the problem is that the Arabs are busy doing other things right now. And so the people you would think of as possibly natural allies are kind of, their attention is elsewhere. And so the positive effect they could have on you, on this general framework, that's absent at the moment because they're all fighting for their own survival.
So it becomes more of an urgent problem for the Israelis and less of an issue for the Arab world at large.
This is I mean, if you ask the typical...
The Americans. And
the Americans. I mean, obviously, if you're listing the top 5 biggest problems for America in the Middle East, right now, this is number...
8, 9, 10.
I don't know. Maybe it's 4 or 5, but it's certainly not... It's been number 1 forever, and it's just not number 1. I mean, we're kidding ourselves.
And does John Kerry agree as well?
It's not exactly correct, Jeffrey.
What?
It wasn't number 1 when you fought Iraq for the first time. It wasn't number 1 when you invaded Iraq.
What was the whole point of the Iraq? I mean, what came out of the Iraq War? The State Department and James Baker pivoted right to Madrid. They said, this Iraq War is a prelude to the thing we really want to do,
Madrid.
which is bring about Middle East peace. So, I mean, there's always been this impulse, like, this is the thing we have to fix. And again, they were captive to the idea, the linkage idea, that if we fix this, then this problem over here also gets fixed. Because what really makes Arabs angry is Israel.
They were hearing
and so,
from their Arab interlocutors over and over and over again that they cannot be more supportive of America because of America's support for Israel.
Well, you know, what we've noticed over the last 20 or 30 years is that Arabs say that they're always happy when American forces come to rescue them from their own mistakes and problems. I mean, anger over America's support for Israel did not stop Kuwait and Saudi Arabia from accepting 500,000 American troops to go dislodge Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. Whenever they're in trouble, as they are right now, they're happy to take American help. So I always thought that was a little bit of nonsense from the Arab leadership on that question. But no, it's not. This is not an important problem anymore.
Koby?
Yeah, if I may, I would like to shift the conversation, not from the, frankly, I don't care about the Arabs' set of priorities. I'm talking about Israel's set of priorities. The conference is Zionism 3.0, and I'm claiming that what we see today is a real danger. We see perhaps the first signs of a binational state reality when we can no longer think about a two-state solution because the two peoples are killing each other and are hating each other in an irreversible manner. So that's the disease that must be stopped. And it could be stopped if you look at the options of Israeli leadership. Those who claim that the status quo can be maintained, I think, are wrong. I agree with Tzipi Chotovely that the unilateral approach is wrong. I think that going back to bilateral negotiations between Israel and Palestinians is wrong. We need to look for a different formula. And the different formula is to leverage the regional opportunity and the alliance possibility that we still have with a few states to embrace in a nuanced manner the Arab Peace Initiative and to sit down to negotiate both regional issues and Palestinian-Israeli core issues at the same time. Now let me give you something that we're going to publish in the next 2 weeks. We've conducted a very detailed survey on Israeli positions. Only 5% of Israeli Jews, are willing to live in a binational state. 58 want to see separation from the Palestinians. 61% want to see an Israeli initiative taken by the government in order to break the impasse on the current status quo. And finally, while 80% don't believe the Palestinians, about 75 to 80% will accept a regional peace deal if and only if the two-state solution is within a regional context.
But
that's going to take time.
This still brings us back to Aluf's point earlier, which is that even if theoretically Israelis support a peaceful solution, they're not ready to make the concessions which will meet the Palestinian demands.
Well, we see very different trends. Up until a year ago, changing the status quo in Jerusalem and splitting Jerusalem to Jewish neighborhoods and Arab neighborhoods gained something like 40%. Today we are seeing 51%. Israelis wake up to a new reality, and the one thing that you can be sure about is that they are not going to hit their heads in the wall. Nobody thinks that Jerusalem is united anymore. Nobody thinks that King David built Sheikh Jarrah and Shuafat, and nobody thinks that for 2,000 years we wanted to go to a city that has a non-Zionist majority. So there is a new reality beneath the surface. It will take time, but if the right leadership will act upon it, we will see a solution.
You know, Mr. Harel, Koby preferred to speak about the Israeli term, and I want to speak about the Israeli term. I am warning recently from the fact that the Israeli young soldiers are going to El Shuhada Street in Hebron in order to create apartheid. I am warning from the fact, from the reality that the bad policy of the Israeli government sending those young soldiers to the neighborhood in Jerusalem in order to create apartheid policy. And I am warning from the fact that inside Israel there is more than 1.5 million citizens, Arab citizens in Israel, and there is discrimination over there. There is two levels of life between those people and those people, despite the fact that both of them is under the definition civilian and citizens in Israel. The character of the states is under dangerous because the value, the management value, created the huge story, successful story over the world. Israel is so successful country in high tech, in medicine, agriculture, and you are going yearly to the Nobel stage in order to took the award over there because of the huge story. But you failed in the values in order to create something has a light, something has a hope. You know the anthem of Israel, the name of the anthem is hope. What is the hope? When we are not disengaged within the value peace between the Palestinian side and Israeli side. I have a hope, own hope, that Benjamin Netanyahu is a strong man. He is a very clever man. He can be Melech Israel. But
King of Israel.
Yes,
BB
but
King.
he is ignoring from the main stage in order to create a hope in our relationship between the Palestinian side and the Israeli side. More than 56 countries, Islamic countries, in the Saudian initiative has the willing in order to give the Israeli side the recognition in the Middle East. But Benjamin Netanyahu lost this opportunity. And now we are speaking about the future. What future we are talking about?
Jeffrey?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add something to what you said because it's very pertinent. What happened in Washington in March is that people gave up, not just Obama, not just people around Obama, people gave up an illusion about Netanyahu. Obama always believed, and this is a sort of a mainstream Democratic and mainstream foreign policy elite idea, Obama believed that Netanyahu, by virtue of his biography, by virtue of the party he comes from, by virtue of his personality and character, is the only person on the Israeli political stage who can deliver 70% of Israelis to a painful compromise.
And
right?
that idea died with his speech in Congress or with his
What happened in March?
video address during the election day?
Netanyahu did two things. I mean, he did a bunch of things, but the first was denouncing, under pressure, electoral campaign pressure, denouncing the idea, then he pulled back, but he denounced the idea of a two-state solution. He said, I'm not for a two-state solution. And it was obviously more complicated than that, but that was the way he interpreted it. And then what really set people off was the Arabs are coming to the polls in droves, which was a characterological issue, and that was sort of a self-indictment.
It was a smart political move. It might have won him the elections.
It was a smart political move, but it was so beyond the pale. Again, we're getting into the issues that I talked about before, but that was an Israel that Americans, liberal-minded Americans, don't recognize. And what happened there, I mean, look, you're dealing with, let's be frank about it, you're dealing with a president, the first African-American president, who's sitting in the White House because of the American Civil Rights Movement, who hears his ostensible ally say, get to the polls quickly, the Arabs are coming in droves, you better vote against them. That was it. That was halas, you know. And so that's the moment we're in, and I'm not sure there are many people left who think. See, the tragedy, if I might, just for 30 seconds, the tragedy is that I've always had this notion that there are three seats in the Zionist pantheon, to mix monotheism and polytheism for a minute. There's Herzl, who had the modern dream of a Jewish return to Zion. There's Ben Gurion, who's sitting there, who made that dream concrete.
And then
but it was going to be Rabin. It was going to be Rabin, but he was assassinated. And then it could have plausibly been Arik Sharon, but he was felled by a stroke, and now it's all on Bibi, right? There's the only figure, the only one who could give Israel a permanent place in the sun. The king of Jordan always talks about this. Like we meaning the Hashemites, we could be the gateway for Israel to a quarter of the world, to the 56 or 54 members of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, right? We can be the ones who turn most of the world toward Israel and say, Israel, these are your borders, these are your fixed borders, this is your international legitimacy, and everybody's just waiting for an Israeli who can do that, and Netanyahu seems to be acted on by events.
But here's the issue. Let's say Netanyahu faces a situation like Sharon did, like Begin did, in which he's under enormous pressure that he cannot bear to do something, to withdraw,
political
to
pressure.
make concessions, political, security pressure, whatever pressure. Is he going to resign, to say, I will not do this? I will leave that to my successor. I cannot do this. This is suicide. I'm not going to do it. Or is he going to act like Sharon, who destroyed the same settlements that he had built?
This is the conclusion that was drawn in Washington in March, is that Bibi Netanyahu is not the savior of Israel. He's the mayor of Jerusalem. He thinks like a mayor. He'll say what he needs to do. He's small-minded, in other words. That he's never, that Joe Biden line. Joe Biden had
but maybe
that he won't take the political risk for.
But maybe he's a better diplomat than Sharon, that is simply able to push away all these pressures and not to reach what Sharon called the corals. The point of no return for, Sharon was he raised sheep in his farm, and you know what happened to them at the end of the agricultural season. And he used to equate the final status negotiations to the corals in his farm. And he tried to stay away from that, and he failed. He was under external and domestic pressure, so he withdrew from Gaza. And Netanyahu so far has been smart enough to stay away from the corals.
I'm not sure that he was speaking about the sheep. Wasn't it the bull and the matador? This might have been more of a... Well, I would like to ask you, because...
one sentence... Benjamin Netanyahu is very good historical man, figure. He liked the history. he have the motivation to be there in the future. But he should convince himself, and I think he knows this fact, no nation over the world can relinquish, this is the word, relinquish the wishes and the willing to the freedom and to independence. So, if it is the way, he should do it now, not tomorrow, in order to make us with a good tomorrow and not looking backward. You know, in the Middle East, there is a role. If you are not going forward, you are going immediately backward. Thank you.
Koby?
Yeah, I think we are hitting the last and the most important point. The issue is not what is the plan or what the parameters are or what are the solutions. The issue is the question of leadership. And the question is whether Netanyahu, but not only Netanyahu, whether the Israeli leadership would look into the future and will reach a historical decision to solve the conflict we propose along the ways of looking at the Israeli-Arab conflict, not just the Israeli-Palestinian one. And while these things look right now as the most remote possibility because of the chaos in the region and the political situation, I would like to remind ourselves that if we were meeting, if this conference took place in 1971 and there was a statement by somebody that within a decade Menachem Begin will be the prime minister and he will return Sinai, everybody in the conference would think that that is a false analysis and a crazy statement. Now,
Both counts.
sorry.
On both counts.
Yeah, but these things happened. And we have seen 40 years where a few miracles did happen. Have we finished the story? No. But we have an Arab Peace Initiative, we have an opportunity, we have an understanding, a growing understanding that this cannot be sustained and therefore something will happen. And I believe that in the next 5-10 years we will see a solution, because otherwise the question of Zionism 3.0 will be almost unrealistic. We will not have a Zionist project ahead of us.
Do you believe that Netanyahu is capable of being the person who delivers this?
I believe that he possesses the ability to do that. He won't do it on his own. There needs to be a network of leaders who together will sit and move into this space. And frankly, it can be Netanyahu with the others. And if not, a new generation of leaders will come and they will do just that. So I'm not going to go into the business of prophesying whether this is going to be a Netanyahu project or not.
Okay, we have one question from the audience, Lenny Greenberg. Where is the Palestinian accountability in the two-state solution? We talked quite a lot about the Israeli side. There were quite a lot of accusations regarding Prime Minister Netanyahu, but there's another partner in this, which is the Palestinian side. Maybe Jeff.
Could I just say a very quick thing on that? I mean, it's a fascinating question, and obviously Palestinian leadership is sclerotic and corrupt and myopic and everything that we know about it. But you know, to me, the interesting question, the interesting aspect of Zionism is about Jews taking control of their destiny. And having dysfunctional partners is not an excuse to sit around paralyzed. That's the basic, that's my, you know, you have to shape, Zionism is about shaping your reality, not just waiting to be acted upon by history, but shaping your reality, not waiting for the perfect Palestinian to come along.
In my view, Abu Mazen on his own cannot be the only partner. But Abu Mazen, with a few other Arab leaders, could definitely be a worthy partner to do that. And I fully agree with Jeffrey. I fully agree with you. We should take control. We should take the initiative. We should make a decision, and we should outline the way. We don't hear it from our leaders. This is what we need to demand from them. What is your plan going forward? And we've heard lots of complaints about the current situation. We didn't hear yet a plan. And that's what we need to demand from our leaders, whether the current one or the future one.
You know, Harel, Arafat was the enemy of Israel. But suddenly, he became to be the engaged man to Rabin and Peres and Barak. Hamas is the enemy of Israel, but Israel negotiated Hamas when Gilad Shalit was in Gaza. They negotiated in Cairo in 2 rooms, separate room. If it is not a negotiation, I haven't any knowledge about negotiation. Israel should speak also with Hamas in the future in order to create something else. As I said, Arafat, and I mentioned the past examples in this term.
However, there's still quite a difference between Arafat, Abbas, and Hamas. And Arafat, you mentioned him as an Israeli partner. By the end of his term, he was despised by the Israelis. It was after the Second Intifada. And regarding Hamas, we have to remember that they refused to recognize Israel or hold
But
any
do
kind
they
of...
abide by the ceasefire?
They do. When it comes to survival of the regime, when it comes to Gaza remaining, if you'd like, an Islamic caliphate, ruled by Hamas,
Independent, whatever.
this is the first interest, and for that they will be ready to make all kinds of concessions and sometimes indirect negotiations. When it comes to a peace agreement, I don't think it's in the cards with Hamas. There's an ideological obstacle which is huge. Okay, this more or less concludes our discussion.
On that optimistic note.
We're out of time. I'd like to thank all the participants and wish you a good evening.
Thank you to our panel and to Amos.